The War Council of the Hegemony met in the crystalline chambers of Nexus Prime, their forms casting long shadows across the polished floors. Admiral Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire leaned forward, his forearms spread across the holographic display showing human settlements scattered across dozens of worlds. "These mammals should have surrendered by now," he growled, his translator struggling with the guttural sounds of his language. "We have destroyed their fleets, occupied their colonies, and demonstrated our superior firepower. Yet they continued to resist." The assembled representatives of 12 alien species nodded in agreement. The war against humanity had been expected to last mere cycles, not the 3 standard years it had already consumed. Humans were considered a primitive species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. Their technology was crude, their ships outdated, and their military tactics seemed chaotic at best. Commander Silk Thera of the Meridian Collective, her serpentine form coiled around her floating chair, hissed her frustration. "Our psychological profiles indicated they would collapse after losing their homeworld's orbital defenses. Instead, they have become more aggressive. Their hit-and-run tactics are unpredictable." High Counselor Morgan of the Cygnus Federation, whose species had joined the hegemony for protection rather than conquest, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we underestimated their attachment to their territories. Some species fight harder when cornered." Admiral Zethkar's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Attachment means nothing against overwhelming force. We have studied their history. They surrender to each other constantly. Their own records show countless examples of capitulation when faced with superior numbers. What the hegemony failed to understand was the context of those surrenders. Humans surrendered to other humans because they shared common ground, common biology, common understanding of mercy, and prisoner treatment. The hegemony offered no such assurances. Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel. Defiant watched the hegemony fleet approach through her ship's sensors. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one capable of glassing a planet, moved in perfect formation toward the human colony of New Thermopylae. The colony's 1 million inhabitants had refused evacuation, choosing instead to fight. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the hegemony flagship," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station. On screen, Admiral Zethkar's alien features filled the view screen, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he spoke. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now and we will grant you a swift death. Continue to resist and we will make examples of your civilians." Captain Chen stood slowly, her hand resting on the back of her command chair. Behind her, the bridge crew continued their work with calm efficiency. They had heard such threats before. "Admiral," she replied, her voice steady, "you seem to misunderstand something fundamental about my species. We don't surrender to monsters, and we certainly don't abandon our people to them." The alien admiral's expression was unreadable to human eyes, but his tone carried obvious irritation. "Your vessel cannot possibly threaten our fleet. You have no support, no reinforcements. This is illogical." Chen smiled, though the expression held no warmth. "You're right about one thing. This fight isn't about logic. It's about honor." The transmission ended as Chen gave the order to attack. The Defiant, a single human cruiser, accelerated toward the hegemony fleet at full burn. Her crew of 200 had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. But that wasn't the point. The point was to buy time. While the Defiant engaged the hegemony fleet in a doomed but fierce battle, emergency broadcasts went out across human space. Not surrender negotiations or peace offerings, but something the aliens couldn't have predicted. Hunting calls. On Earth, Admiral Marcus Webb stood before the assembled fleet commanders, his weathered face grim with determination. The reports from the outer colonies painted a clear picture. The hegemony wasn't interested in conquest in any traditional sense. They were exterminators. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's desperate situation. "The enemy has made their intentions clear. They don't want to rule us. They want to erase us. They believe we'll break, that we'll beg, that we'll crawl on our bellies and plead for mercy they have no intention of giving." He paused, looking at each face around the table. These were humanity's finest military minds, veterans of countless conflicts, leaders who had seen war in all its terrible forms. They're about to learn why that's a mistake. They think they're hunting prey. They don't realize they've just made themselves the hunted. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't going to be a traditional war of territorial conquest or political negotiation. This was going to be a war of extinction, and humanity was fighting for the right to exist. Admiral Webb activated the holographic display, showing the current positions of human forces scattered across known space. We're going to do what we do best. We're going to hunt them, not like soldiers fighting a war, but like predators taking down a threat to our pack. The strategy that emerged from that meeting would later be called the Wolf Doctrine. Instead of trying to match the hegemony's overwhelming firepower with conventional tactics, humanity would embrace its predatory nature. They would hunt in packs, strike at weak points, and use the aliens' own advantages against them. The hegemony's superior numbers meant larger supply lines. Their advanced technology required specialized maintenance facilities. Their perfectly coordinated fleets depended on predictable communication networks. Each advantage could become a vulnerability in the hands of determined hunters. On New Thermopylae, the colonists prepared for siege while monitoring the space battle above. The Defiant had taken 3 of the hegemony dreadnoughts with her before finally succumbing to overwhelming firepower. Captain Chen and her crew had died as they lived, fighting with honor against impossible odds. But their sacrifice had accomplished its purpose. The colony's defenses were now fully activated, and more importantly, the hunting packs were mobilizing. Across human space, ships were slipping away from their bases, disappearing into the dark between stars. The hegemony had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They had studied human history and seen surrender, but they had missed the crucial context. Humans surrendered to other humans because they expected to be treated as fellow sentient beings. When faced with an enemy that offered only extinction, humans stopped being civilized soldiers and became what they had always been at their core: apex predators defending their territory. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had spent millions of years as hunters before they became farmers, soldiers, or spacefaring explorers. And when their survival was threatened, they remembered how to hunt. 3 weeks after the fall of New Thermopylae, the hegemony learned their first lesson about hunting humans. It came in the form of destroyed supply convoys, crippled communication relays, and the systematic elimination of their forward observation posts. Admiral Zethkar stared at the tactical display in his command center, his forearms trembling with barely controlled rage. 17 supply ships had vanished in the past week alone, not destroyed in glorious battle, but picked off one by one like wounded animals separated from the herd. The humans were using tactics that defied every military doctrine in the hegemony's vast databases. How are they doing this? He demanded of his intelligence officer, a thin, pale creature from the ethereal combine. Our sensors detect nothing. Our escorts see no attackers. The ships simply disappear. The intelligence officer's tendrils quivered as it consulted its data streams. The attacks follow no pattern we can identify, Admiral. They strike at different locations, different times, using different methods. Some ships are found gutted and drifting. Others vanish completely. The humans appear to be operating in small independent units with no central coordination. What the hegemony couldn't understand was that the lack of central coordination was intentional. Human pack hunters didn't need a central authority telling them where to find prey. They could smell weakness, sense opportunity, and adapt their tactics on the fly. Each hunting pack was a self-contained predator, choosing its own targets and methods. Captain Elena Vasquez crouched in the maintenance tunnel of Hegemony Supply Station Gamma 7, her team of 12 humans moving silently through the alien structure. They had been inside the station for 3 days, studying the enemy's routines, learning their weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The station was a critical hub in the hegemony's supply network, processing food, ammunition, and fuel for their advancing fleets. It was heavily defended by automated systems and a garrison of 200 alien soldiers. By any conventional military assessment, attacking it was suicide. But conventional military assessments assumed you were trying to hold territory or fight pitched battles. The humans weren't interested in either. They were here to feed. "Thermal charges are set," whispered Sergeant Kim through the comm system. "Main power core, backup generators, and the fuel processing center. When these go off, this place is going dark permanently." Vasquez nodded, checking her chronometer. "Rodriguez, status on the computer core. Uploading the virus now, Captain. This baby will propagate through their entire network before they know what hit them. Every system this station has ever communicated with will start developing glitches within the next few weeks. The beauty of the plan wasn't just the immediate destruction of the station. It was the cascade of failures that would follow. The virus Rodriguez was uploading had been designed by human programmers who understood something the hegemony didn't. Complex systems were vulnerable to chaos. The hegemony's technology was incredibly advanced but also incredibly integrated. Every system talked to every other system, sharing data and protocols in a vast web of interconnected networks. The virus wouldn't destroy anything immediately. Instead, it would introduce tiny errors, microscopic delays, barely noticeable inconsistencies that would compound over time. Within a month, hegemony ships would find their navigation systems slightly off. Their weapons would miss targets by fractions of degrees. Their supply manifests would contain small discrepancies that would grow into major shortages. The virus was designed to make their own technology unreliable, turning their greatest strength into a weakness. Movement on level 3, reported Chen from her overwatch position. Patrol of 6 Vorthak soldiers, standard sweep pattern. Vasquez smiled grimly. The aliens were so predictable in their movements, so rigid in their thinking. They patrolled the same routes at the same times, checked the same security points in the same order. It was exactly the kind of behavior that got prey species eaten in the wild. Let them pass, she ordered. We're not here to fight guards. We're here to kill the station itself. The team waited in perfect silence as the alien patrol moved past their hiding spot. Each human had spent months training in stealth techniques, learning to move like shadows, to become invisible even in the most advanced sensor networks. They had studied the hegemony's detection systems and found the gaps, the blind spots, the assumptions that could be exploited. When the patrol was gone, Vasquez gave the signal. The thermal charges detonated simultaneously, sending cascading power failures throughout the station. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows as the humans moved toward their extraction point. The station's garrison reacted exactly as predicted. They rushed toward the sources of the explosions following their training and protocols. They never thought to check the maintenance tunnels where the real threat was quietly slipping away. By the time the hegemony forces realized they had been infiltrated, the humans were already aboard their stealth ship, accelerating away from the dying station. Behind them, Gamma 7 began the slow process of tearing itself apart as critical. Systems failed in sequence. Admiral Zethkar received the report of Gamma 7's destruction while reviewing casualty reports from the frontier. The numbers were becoming difficult to ignore. In 3 weeks of what should have been routine occupation duty, the hegemony had lost more ships and personnel than in the first 6 months of the war. This cannot continue, he growled to his staff. We are being bled to death by insects. Where are their fleets? Where are their bases? How are they coordinating these attacks? His chief of staff, a methodical creature from the algorithmic concordance, consulted its probability matrices. Admiral, our analysis suggests the humans are not coordinating these attacks in any traditional sense. Each unit appears to be operating independently, selecting targets based on opportunity rather than strategic planning. The concept was so alien to the hegemony's way of thinking that most of the command staff couldn't even process it. Every military doctrine they knew emphasized coordination, planning, and hierarchical command structures. The idea that an effective military force could operate without central control was beyond their comprehension, but that was exactly what made it so effective. Each human hunting pack was a complete ecosystem unto itself. They could identify targets, plan attacks, execute missions, and disappear without ever communicating with other units. They were predators in their natural element, and the hegemony was providing them with an endless supply of prey. On the human world of Epsilon Cygni, Commander Sarah Park reviewed intelligence reports from across the theater of operations. The hunting packs were exceeding all expectations. In just 3 weeks, they had disabled or destroyed over 200 hegemony assets without losing a single ship to direct combat. The strategy was working, but Park knew it was only the beginning. The hegemony would eventually adapt, would learn to counter human tactics. When that happened, humanity would need to evolve its approach once again. She activated her secure communication system and began composing messages to the pack leaders scattered across the galaxy. Not orders or instructions, but information. Intelligence about enemy movements, identified vulnerabilities, opportunities for coordination without central control. The messages would go out on quantum channels that the hegemony couldn't intercept, spreading like pheromone trails that guided predators to their prey. Each pack leader would interpret the information according to their own judgment, their own understanding of their capabilities and situation. Some would choose to continue the hit-and-run attacks that were proving so effective. Others would begin preparing for the next phase of the hunting strategy, forcing the hegemony to divide their forces by threatening multiple critical targets simultaneously. The aliens had expected to face an army. Instead, they were being stalked by an entire species that had just remembered it was made of apex predators. And the hunt was only beginning. The hegemony's first major tactical adaptation came in the form of convoy escorts. Admiral Zethkar had tripled the number of warships protecting each supply run and implemented randomized routes that changed daily. For 2 weeks, the strategy seemed to work. Human attacks decreased significantly, and the Admiral allowed himself to believe he had finally solved the problem. He was wrong. Commander Jacob Torres watched the massive hegemony convoy through his ship's passive sensors, counting the escort vessels with professional interest. 37 cargo haulers protected by 15 heavy cruisers and 3 battleships. It was an impressive show of force, exactly the kind of overwhelming firepower the hegemony used to solve every problem. "That's a lot of firepower for a milk run," observed his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Hayes. "They're really committed to this escort idea." Torres smiled without humor. The hegemony's response was predictable, because they thought like a traditional military force. When faced with a problem, they applied more resources, more firepower, more coordination. They couldn't conceive of an enemy that viewed their adaptations as opportunities rather than obstacles. "Signal the other packs," Torres ordered. "Operation Feeding Frenzy is a go." What the hegemony hadn't realized was that the humans had been studying their new escort patterns for weeks, learning the timing, the routes, the communication protocols. They had been waiting for the convoys to become large enough and predictable enough to make the next phase of the hunt worthwhile. The attack began 3 light hours away from the convoy's position, where a human strike team disabled a communication relay that the convoy would need to call for reinforcements. Simultaneously, another team sabotaged a refueling station along the convoy's projected route, forcing them to take a detour through a system that offered fewer options for escape. By the time the convoy realized they were being herded, it was too late to change course without running dangerously low on fuel. They had been maneuvered into exactly the position the human hunters wanted them. The first phase of the attack was psychological. Human ships began appearing on the convoy's sensors, just at the edge of detection range. They never came close enough to engage, never presented a clear target, but they were always there, following, watching, waiting. The escort commanders found themselves constantly adjusting their formations, reinforcing their flanks, preparing for attacks that never came. Admiral Zethkar received the convoy's status reports with growing unease. The humans were using a tactic he had never encountered before. They were making the convoy paranoid. The constant presence of shadowing vessels was forcing his commanders to burn fuel-maintaining combat formations, to strain their crews with extended alert periods, to make decisions based on fear rather than tactical assessment. "Why don't they attack?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. "They have sufficient numbers for an engagement. Their positioning suggests a coordinated assault plan. What are they waiting for?" The intelligence officer's response revealed the fundamental gap in hegemony understanding. "Perhaps they lack the courage for direct confrontation, Admiral. Their previous attacks have all targeted isolated or lightly defended assets." It was exactly the wrong interpretation. The humans weren't afraid to fight. They were patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to feed. That moment came when the convoy entered the Kepler Nebula, a region of space where sensor range was limited and communication was unreliable. The hegemony had chosen this route because they believed the nebula would provide concealment from human scouts. Instead, it became a killing ground. The attack didn't come as a massive assault or a coordinated fleet engagement. It came as a series of precision strikes that seemed to emerge from the nebula itself. Human ships appeared from the sensor-dead zones, engaged single targets with overwhelming local firepower, and disappeared back into the stellar soup before the escorts could respond. Lieutenant Commander Hayes piloted their stealth ship through the nebula's glowing clouds, using the electromagnetic interference to mask their approach to a hegemony cargo vessel. Their target was isolated from the main convoy by barely 200 kilometers. But in the nebula's sensor-limiting environment, it might as well have been on the other side of the galaxy. Target acquired, reported their weapons officer. Cargo hauler, minimal defensive systems carrying what looks like fuel and ammunition. Torres nodded. Light it up. Full spread, maximum damage, minimum exposure. The attack lasted exactly 43 seconds. The human ship emerged from the nebula, unleashed every weapon it carried into the cargo vessel's hull, and vanished back into the electromagnetic storm before the explosion had finished expanding. By the time the escort vessels reached the coordinates, they found only debris and radiation. The pattern repeated throughout the convoy as human hunting packs picked off cargo vessels one by one. Each attack was precisely timed, perfectly executed, and completely unpredictable. The escorts found themselves chasing shadows, firing at sensor ghosts, protecting empty space while the real threats materialized somewhere else entirely. Within 6 hours, the convoy had lost 22 of its 37 cargo vessels and 2 escort cruisers that had been caught out of position trying to respond to phantom attacks. The remaining ships huddled together in a defensive formation that only made them easier targets for the coordinated assault that finally came. When the humans did attack directly, it wasn't with the grinding attrition warfare the hegemony expected. It was with the sudden, overwhelming violence of predators taking down wounded prey. 5 human battleships emerged from the nebula simultaneously, concentrating their fire on the convoy's command vessel, while smaller ships swarmed the remaining escorts. The battle was over in minutes. The hegemony's superior individual firepower meant nothing when they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and fighting an enemy that had chosen the time and place of engagement. The convoy that had been meant to demonstrate the hegemony's ability to adapt and overcome human tactics instead became a lesson in why humans were the apex predators of their homeworld. Commander, Torres surveyed the aftermath of the engagement, while his ships collected intelligence from the wreckage. The hegemony's communication logs would provide valuable information about their fleet movements and strategic planning. Their technology would be analyzed and reverse-engineered. Their tactical doctrines would be studied and countered. But more importantly, the complete destruction of such a heavily escorted convoy would send a message throughout the hegemony's forces. No convoy was safe. No escort was sufficient. No adaptation would protect them from the human hunt. Signal all packs, Torres ordered. Phase 3 is approved. Begin targeting infrastructure. The message went out across the human communication network, reaching hunting packs scattered throughout hegemony space. Phase 1 had been harassment and probing. Phase 2 had been demonstrating the futility of conventional defensive measures. Phase 3 would be systematic destruction of the hegemony's ability to maintain their war effort. Admiral Zethkar received the news of the convoy's destruction in his command center on Nexus Prime. The reports were almost too horrific to believe. An entire convoy protected by 18 warships, destroyed to the last vessel in a single engagement. The humans had demonstrated tactical sophistication far beyond anything in their previous behavior. This changes everything, he admitted to his staff. We are not fighting the primitive rabble we expected. This is a coordinated campaign, executed by a military force that understands our weaknesses better than we understand our own strengths. His chief of staff's probability matrices had reached the same conclusion. Admiral, our current tactical doctrine is insufficient for this threat. We need to fundamentally reconsider our approach to human resistance. For the first time since the war began, Admiral Zethkar felt something he had never experienced in decades of conquest: uncertainty. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy the hegemony had ever faced. They weren't trying to hold territory, protect resources, or achieve traditional military objectives. They were hunting, and the hegemony was becoming their prey. The realization sent ripples of unease through the command structure of every hegemony species. For the first time in their collective memory, they were facing an enemy that seemed to be enjoying the war. The humans weren't just resisting occupation, they were actively hunting hegemony forces with the patient determination of predators who knew their prey was already wounded and running scared. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had been at the top of their planet's food chain for good reason. And now they were bringing those same hunting instincts to bear on an interstellar scale. The hunting packs had evolved beyond simple harassment operations. Captain Maria Santos crouched in the ventilation system of Hegemony Orbital Facility, Sigma Delta 9, watching alien technicians work on what their intelligence had identified as a quantum communication hub. The facility processed command and control signals for an entire sector of hegemony space, coordinating fleet movements across 12 star systems. It was also completely isolated from any support, hanging in the void between two gas giants with only a skeleton crew of maintenance personnel, the perfect target for what humans had started calling infrastructure hunting. "Package is in position," whispered Sergeant Liu through the comm system. "Quantum resonance disruptor locked onto the main transmitter array. When this thing goes off, it won't just destroy the facility. It'll send feedback pulses through every quantum link in their network." Santos smiled grimly. The hegemony's greatest advantage was their communication technology, which allowed instantaneous coordination across vast distances. But like all advanced technology, it was vulnerable to the right kind of sabotage. The device Liu was planting wouldn't just destroy this facility. It would propagate destructive interference patterns through the entire quantum network, causing cascading failures throughout hegemony space. The beauty of the plan was that the hegemony wouldn't even know they were under attack until it was too late. The quantum feedback would look like random technical failures, equipment malfunctions, and communication glitches. By the time they realized someone was systematically destroying their infrastructure, half their command network would be offline. "Timer set for 30 minutes, Liu reported. "That gives us 20 minutes to reach the extraction point and 10 minutes to clear the blast radius." The team moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, avoiding the automated security systems they had spent weeks mapping and studying. Each member was a specialist in a different aspect of infiltration and sabotage, trained to operate independently but capable of seamless coordination when necessary. They were apex predators adapted for technological hunting, and the hegemony's advanced civilization was providing them with an environment rich in prey. Halfway across the galaxy, Admiral Zethkar was beginning to understand the scope of the disaster unfolding around him. In the past month, 17 major facilities had suffered catastrophic failures. Supply depots exploded without warning. Communication relays developed inexplicable malfunctions. Refueling stations lost pressure containment in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His engineering staff insisted the failures were random, the result of pushing their infrastructure beyond safe operational limits to support the extended military campaign. But Zethkar was beginning to suspect something far more sinister. "Show me the failure analysis again," he ordered his chief engineer, a methodical creature from the Precision Collective, whose species had built most of the hegemony's infrastructure. The holographic display showed the pattern of failures across hegemony space. To most observers, it looked random, but Zethkar was starting to see the subtle intelligence behind the apparent chaos. The failures weren't random. They were carefully orchestrated to maximize disruption while maintaining plausible deniability. "These are not accidents," he concluded. "The humans are inside our infrastructure. They're destroying us from within." The revelation was terrifying not just for its immediate implications, but for what it revealed about human capabilities. The hegemony's facilities were protected by the most advanced security systems in the galaxy. The idea that primitive humans could infiltrate them at will was almost impossible to accept, but the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, human infiltrators were penetrating the most secure installations in hegemony space and sabotaging critical systems with surgical precision. They were demonstrating a level of technological sophistication and operational security that challenged every assumption about human capabilities. Commander Santos and her team reached their extraction point just as the quantum disruptor activated. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems as the feedback pulse tore through the hegemony's communication network, severing quantum links and destroying relay stations throughout the sector. Within hours, hegemony fleet commanders found themselves operating in communication blackouts, unable to coordinate with their supporting elements or receive updated orders from Central Command. Ships that had been part of coordinated battle groups suddenly found themselves isolated and vulnerable, forced to make decisions based on outdated intelligence and local assessment. It was exactly the environment human hunters had been waiting for. The isolated hegemony ships became individual targets for hunting packs that had been shadowing fleet movements for weeks. Without communication support, without coordination, without the overwhelming numerical advantage that the hegemony relied on, each ship became prey for predators that specialized in taking down isolated targets. Captain Rebecca Chen commanded one of the hunting packs that responded to the communication blackout. Her 3-ship squadron had been tracking a hegemony battleship for 6 days, waiting for the right moment to strike. The quantum network failure had given them that moment. "Target is operating alone now," reported her tactical officer. "No escort, no communication with command, and they're following standard patrol patterns. They don't even know they're cut off from the network yet." Chen studied the tactical display. The hegemony battleship was powerful enough to destroy her entire squadron in a direct confrontation. But it was designed to operate as part of a coordinated fleet, supported by intelligence networks and supply chains that no longer existed. "Signal the other ships," she ordered. "We're going to show them what happens when apex predators hunt alone." The attack was a masterpiece of coordinated pack hunting. Chen's ships approached from 3 different vectors, using the system's asteroid field for concealment. They waited until the battleship was committed to investigating what appeared to be a sensor anomaly, then struck simultaneously from multiple directions. The hegemony ship's superior firepower meant nothing when it was surrounded and outmaneuvered by smaller, faster vessels that could concentrate their fire on specific weak points. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes, ending when a coordinated torpedo strike breached the battleship's reactor containment. As Chen watched the enemy vessel break apart in a cascade of explosions, she reflected on how completely the tactical situation had changed. 3 months ago, a single hegemony battleship would have been considered an insurmountable threat. Now it was just another kill for the pack. The psychological impact of the infrastructure hunting campaign was as devastating as the physical damage. Hegemony personnel throughout the war zone began to report symptoms of extreme stress and paranoia. They knew human infiltrators were operating inside their facilities, but they had no way to detect or stop them. Every equipment malfunction became suspect. Every system failure could be sabotage. Every colleague might be a disguised human agent. The hegemony's own advanced technology was becoming a source of terror, rather than confidence. Admiral Zethkar received reports of decreasing morale and efficiency throughout his command structure. His forces were becoming afraid of their own equipment, suspicious of their own systems, paralyzed by the possibility that everything around them had been compromised by an invisible enemy. "We need to evacuate all non-essential personnel from the frontier facilities," he told his staff. "Reduce our infrastructure footprint to the absolute minimum necessary to maintain military operations." His chief of staff's probability matrices painted a grim picture. "Admiral, if we abandon our infrastructure, we lose the logistical capacity to support extended operations. We would be forced to withdraw to defensive positions within our core territories." The trap was closing. The humans had maneuvered the hegemony into a position where every option led to defeat. They could maintain their infrastructure and watch it be systematically destroyed by invisible infiltrators. Or they could abandon their infrastructure and lose the capacity to project power beyond their home systems. Either choice would end their ability to prosecute the war against humanity. The hunters had isolated their prey and were now forcing it to choose between a quick death and a slow one. But Zethkar was beginning to realize that the humans had already made that choice for them. The hegemony was no longer the predator in this relationship. They had become the prey, and the humans were patient enough to let them understand that fact before delivering the killing blow. The endgame began when Admiral Marcus Webb received confirmation that the hunting packs had successfully isolated the hegemony's core fleet at Nexus Prime. After months of systematic infrastructure destruction and coordinated harassment, the alien forces had been forced to consolidate their remaining assets into a defensive position around their command center. It was exactly what the humans had been working toward. The hegemony's greatest strength had always been their ability to project overwhelming force across multiple star systems simultaneously. By forcing them into a single location, the humans had eliminated that advantage and created the conditions for a decisive engagement. But Webb knew that a direct assault on Nexus Prime would be exactly what the aliens expected. The hegemony still possessed superior firepower and defensive positions that could repel any conventional attack. The humans needed to approach this final phase of the hunt with the same tactical innovation that had brought them this far. "Report from the infiltration teams," announced his intelligence officer, Commander Park. "We have assets in position throughout the Nexus Prime system. The hegemony's defensive grid has been thoroughly mapped, and we've identified 17 critical vulnerabilities." Webb studied the holographic display showing the hegemony's final stronghold. Hundreds of warships arranged in layered defensive formations around massive orbital platforms.
Automated defense networks that could engage thousands of targets simultaneously.
Shield generators powerful enough to protect entire planets. It looked impregnable. It was designed to be impregnable, and that was going to be its downfall. "The hegemony thinks like engineers," Webb observed to his staff. "They build perfect defenses against perfect attacks. They don't understand that the best way to defeat a perfect defense is to make it irrelevant." The plan that emerged from the final strategy session would later be called the Pack Convergence. Instead of trying to overwhelm the hegemony's defenses, the humans would turn those defenses against their creators. Every hunting pack in human space would converge on Nexus Prime simultaneously, but they wouldn't be coming to fight a battle. They would be coming to complete the hunt. Commander Elena Vasquez led her infiltration team through the maintenance tunnels of Orbital Defense Platform 7, one of 12 installations that formed the core of Nexus Prime's defensive grid. Her team had been inside the platform for 2 weeks, learning its systems, mapping its weaknesses, and preparing for the moment when their patience would be rewarded. "Neural interface virus is ready for upload," reported her cyber warfare specialist, Lieutenant Chen. "Once this gets into their network, it'll rewrite the targeting parameters for every defensive system in the grid. Instead of protecting hegemony ships, the platforms will start identifying them as hostile targets." It was a typical human solution to an impossible problem. Instead of trying to destroy the hegemony's defenses, they would corrupt them. The aliens' own weapons would become the instruments of their destruction. "Timer synchronized with the other teams," added Sergeant Rodriguez. "All 12 platforms will be compromised simultaneously. The hegemony won't know what hit them until their own defenses start shooting at them." Vasquez smiled grimly as she watched the alien technicians working at their stations, completely unaware that their most secure facility had been turned into a weapon aimed at their own fleet. The hegemony's rigid thinking and absolute faith in their technology had made them vulnerable to an attack they couldn't even conceive of. In the command center of the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Webb watched the tactical display as hunting packs from across human space converged on Nexus Prime. Each pack had been operating independently for months, developing their own tactical innovations and specialized capabilities. Now they were coming together for the first time, bringing their combined expertise to bear on the hegemony's final stronghold. "All packs report ready," announced his communications officer. 147 ships and 17 hunting formations. "Infiltration teams confirm all objectives are in position." Webb felt a moment of profound satisfaction as he contemplated the force he was about to unleash. The hegemony had expected to face a conventional human fleet, organized along traditional military lines. Instead, they were about to confront an entire species that had evolved into a coordinated hunting machine. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "Begin the final hunt." The attack began not with weapons fire or fleet movements, but with the activation of the neural interface viruses that human infiltrators had planted throughout the hegemony's defensive network. In the space of 3 seconds, every automated defense platform around Nexus Prime switched targets from incoming human ships to the hegemony vessels they had been designed to protect. Admiral Zethkar watched in horror as his own defenses turned against him. Orbital platforms that had cost decades to build and deploy were now firing on his ships with devastating accuracy. The defensive grid that was supposed to make Nexus Prime impregnable had become a trap that was systematically destroying his fleet. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his technical staff. "These systems have quantum-encrypted control protocols. They cannot be hacked or corrupted." His chief engineer's response revealed the gap between hegemony theoretical understanding and human practical innovation. "Admiral, the corruption appears to be at the neural interface level. Somehow the humans have altered the basic pattern, recognition algorithms that identify friendly and hostile targets. It was a concept so fundamentally alien to hegemony, thinking that most of the command staff couldn't even process it. Their technology was designed to be perfect, incorruptible, immune to sabotage. The idea that humans could not only penetrate those systems, but actually reprogram them was beyond their comprehension. But incomprehension wouldn't stop the slaughter that was now unfolding around Nexus Prime. While the hegemony fleet struggled to deal with their corrupted defenses, human hunting packs began their approach to the system. They didn't come as a single coordinated armada, but as multiple smaller formations that struck at different vectors with perfect timing. Captain Torres led his pack in a high-speed attack run on the hegemony's command ship, using the chaos caused by the defensive grid malfunction to approach undetected. His 3 ships moved through the orbital debris field like sharks through bloody water, picking off isolated enemy vessels while avoiding the main concentrations of firepower. "Target the communication arrays first," he ordered his weapons officers. "We want them blind and deaf before we start taking apart their command structure." The engagement that followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The humans fought not as a traditional military force trying to achieve territorial objectives, but as a pack of predators systematically dismantling their prey. Each attack was precisely targeted to maximize psychological impact while minimizing human casualties. They struck at command vessels to disrupt coordination. They destroyed communication arrays to isolate enemy units. They targeted engine systems to prevent escape. Every move was calculated to increase the hegemony's sense of helplessness while demonstrating human tactical superiority. Admiral Zethkar found himself trapped in a nightmare scenario where every advantage his forces possessed was being systematically neutralized. His superior numbers meant nothing when his own defenses were shooting at him. His advanced technology was useless when it had been corrupted by an enemy that understood it better than his own engineers did. "We need to evacuate the system," he finally admitted to his staff. "Gather what ships we can and retreat to the secondary command base at Kepler Station." But when his communications officer tried to send the evacuation order, he discovered that the humans had anticipated even this move. The quantum communication network that connected Nexus Prime to the rest of hegemony space had been systematically destroyed over the past month. There was no way to coordinate a withdrawal, no way to call for reinforcements, no way to even warn other hegemony forces about what was happening. The humans had isolated their prey completely. Now they were moving in for the kill. As the last hegemony resistance around Nexus Prime collapsed, Admiral Webb received a transmission from the alien flagship. Admiral Zethkar appeared on the screen, his forearms spread in what human intelligence had identified as a gesture of surrender among his species. "Admiral Webb," the alien commander said through his translator, "I request terms for the surrender of my remaining forces. We did not understand what we were facing." Webb studied the alien's face, seeing something he hadn't expected: respect. The hegemony admiral was no longer looking at humans as primitive creatures to be exterminated. He was looking at them as fellow apex predators who had proven their dominance. "Admiral," Webb replied, "you made one fundamental error in your assessment of my species. You assumed we would fight like prey. You forgot that humans are hunters. And now you've learned what happens when you threaten our pack. The war was over. The hunt was complete. And the galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating the species that had climbed to the top of their world's food chain through patience, cunning, and the absolute determination to survive." 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station orbiting Earth, watching representatives from 47 different species arrive for what history would record as the Treaty of Terra. The galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted when the war began. The hegemony was finished as a military force, its member species scattered and seeking new alliances or returning to isolationist policies. But more importantly, the entire galactic community had been forced to reassess their understanding of humanity and its place in the cosmic order. "The Meridian Collective has agreed to our terms regarding reparations and territorial boundaries," reported Ambassador Chen, reviewing the negotiation updates on her datapad. "They're also requesting permission to establish an embassy on Earth. Apparently, they want to study human tactical innovations for their own defense forces." Webb nodded without surprise. In the months since the war's end, dozens of species had approached humanity with similar requests. The galaxy had learned that humans possessed military capabilities that couldn't be measured by traditional metrics of technological advancement or fleet size. They wanted to understand how humans thought, how they planned, how they turned disadvantages into advantages and made enemies defeat themselves. The hunting tactics that had destroyed the hegemony were now being studied by military academies across the galaxy. But Webb knew that what made humans effective predators couldn't be easily taught or replicated. It was something that had been forged over millions of years of evolution, refined through countless generations of survival against impossible odds. "Report from the frontier colonies," announced his aide, Commander Park. "The reconstruction efforts are ahead of schedule. The former hegemony territories are being administered by joint human-alien councils, and we've had no major incidents of civil unrest." It was another testament to human adaptability. Once the war was over, humanity had transitioned from hunters to protectors with the same efficiency they had shown in combat. The species that had systematically dismantled the galaxy's most powerful military alliance was now helping to rebuild and restructure the territories they had liberated. The former hegemony species had been surprised by this development. They had expected conquest, occupation, perhaps even extermination. Instead, they found themselves dealing with humans who seemed genuinely interested in establishing stable, mutually beneficial relationships. Admiral Zethkar entered the observation lounge, his movements showing the careful dignity of a former enemy who had earned respect through honorable defeat. His species, the Vorthak, had been among the first to request alliance with humanity after the war's end. "Admiral Webb," he said, his translator now programmed with more nuanced human speech patterns, "I wanted to personally thank you for honoring our agreement regarding Vorthak territorial autonomy. Your species has shown remarkable restraint in victory." Webb studied the alien commander with interest. Over the past months, he had developed something approaching friendship with Zethkar, built on mutual respect between professional military officers. The Vorthak admiral had proven to be an honorable opponent and was becoming a valuable ally. "Admiral, you fought with honor even in an unjust cause. That deserves respect regardless of which side we were on." It was a very human concept. This idea that enemies could become allies, that conflict could end in mutual respect rather than total domination. The hegemony's original philosophy had been based on the assumption that different species could only coexist through hierarchical dominance structures. Humanity was demonstrating an alternative model, cooperation between equals, based on recognition of mutual capabilities and interests. It was proving to be far more stable and productive than the hegemony's forced unity had ever been. "The negotiation sessions have been educational," Zethkar continued. "Your species approaches problems in ways that continue to surprise our analysts. We expected demands for territorial conquest, resource extraction rights, perhaps tribute payments. Instead, you seem primarily interested in preventing future conflicts." Webb smiled slightly. "Admiral, we're predators, not parasites. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to make sure no one else tries to exterminate us." It was a distinction that many alien species were still struggling to understand. Human military doctrine wasn't based on conquest or dominance, but on ensuring the survival and security of their species. They fought not to rule others, but to prevent others from ruling them. The negotiations proceeding in the station's main conference chambers reflected this philosophy. Human representatives were focused on establishing defensive alliances, trade agreements, and mutual security arrangements. They showed little interest in the territorial expansion or resource extraction that had driven most previous galactic conflicts. Ambassador Chen approached with the latest updates from the negotiation teams. "The Crystalline Republic has agreed to our proposal for a joint defense pact. They're offering to share their sensor technology in exchange for tactical training programs. And the Ethereal Combine wants to establish a permanent liaison office to coordinate anti-piracy operations." Each agreement represented a fundamental shift in galactic politics. Instead of the hierarchical power structures that had dominated previous diplomatic arrangements, humanity was building a network of horizontal alliances based on mutual benefit and shared security interests. "What about the former hegemony core worlds?" Webb asked. "They're requesting admission to the Terran Alliance as associate members," Chen replied. "Full membership pending successful completion of governmental reforms and human rights standards. It seems they prefer our protection to trying to rebuild their own military forces." It was perhaps the most significant development of the post-war period. The species that had started the conflict by trying to exterminate humanity were now seeking to join human-led institutions for their own protection. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in the negotiations. Captain Elena Vasquez, now serving as a military liaison to the diplomatic mission, joined the group on the observation deck. Her infiltration teams had been retrained as security advisors, helping former hegemony species protect their own facilities from the kind of attacks they had once suffered. The security assessments are complete, she reported. Most of the former hegemony installations have vulnerabilities that make them sitting ducks for any species that develops infiltration capabilities. We're providing recommendations for defensive improvements, but it's going to take years to bring their security up to acceptable standards. Webb nodded thoughtfully. The hegemony's downfall had revealed a universal truth about advanced civilizations. The more sophisticated their technology became, the more vulnerable they were to unconventional attacks. Humanity's success hadn't been based on superior technology, but on their willingness to think outside the parameters that constrained their enemies. Any word from the exploration fleet, too, he asked. The survey teams have identified 17 systems with signs of possible civilization beyond our current contact zones, Vasquez replied. Command wants to know if we should begin diplomatic approaches or maintain observation protocols. It was a question that went to the heart of humanity's new role in galactic affairs. They had demonstrated their ability to defeat any conventional military threat, but that power came with responsibility. How they chose to interact with newly discovered species would set precedents that could shape galactic politics for generations. Observation protocols for now, Webb decided. We make contact only when they're ready and only on terms that respect their autonomy. We're predators, not bullies. As the representatives from various species continued their negotiations throughout the station, Webb reflected on how completely the galactic balance of power had shifted. 6 months ago, humanity had been a minor species facing extinction. Now they were the dominant military power in known space, setting the terms for galactic diplomacy and security. But what impressed him most was how his species had handled that transition. They could have become conquerors, could have imposed their will on the galaxy through force. Instead, they had chosen to become protectors, using their power to prevent the kind of conflicts that had nearly destroyed them. Admiral Zethkar joined, him at the observation window, looking out at the diplomatic vessels that represented the new galactic order. Your species continues to surprise us, Admiral Webb. We expected victors and instead found shepherds. Webb smiled at the comparison. Admiral, humans spent most of their evolution as pack hunters. We understand the difference between protecting your territory and destroying everything around you. A good predator maintains the ecosystem that supports them. It was perhaps the perfect metaphor for humanity's approach to galactic civilization. They weren't trying to dominate or consume the galaxy, but to maintain the balance that would allow all species to thrive. They had learned to hunt not just prey, but the forces that threatened stability and peace. The Treaty of Terra, when it was finally signed, would establish humanity as the guarantor of galactic security, committed to preventing any single species or alliance from achieving the kind of dominance the hegemony had once sought. It was a role that suited human nature perfectly, eternal,